let's just start and rewind to yesterday. Where were you when you heard about the funding, and what was your initial reaction?
I was here in the UK Sports offices because the British Basketball office is ironically located in UK Sports offices. Initial reaction was actually one of complete and utter shock because that was the first time that the message had been transmitted. And in fairness to UK Sport, they kept that message pretty tight. Not even the people who deal day to day with the sports were told about the decisions. But I just felt, such a dramatic decision, such a devastating decision. I thought that could have been managed in advance of yesterday, quite frankly.
And now 24 hours later, you've had a bit of time to sit and reflect on it and kind of just think about it a little bit. Has your feelings changed at all?
No, not one iota. No, if anything, I'm probably angrier. Yesterday was one of shock, and the initial reaction was we've got to get this message out about what we feel about this situation. It's one of anger and turn into because there's been a lot of media coverage over the last 24 hours, and we've been thinking about that, get the message out, thinking about what we need to do to make the appeal that we will make to UK Sport, and also turning and looking at what type of and nature of campaign can we also kick off to keep this media momentum going, but also to make the case and I suppose look at alternatives if that turns out to be the case, because we're not going to go away. We've got 2 European Championships next year. If people think we're going to go away from that, then they're crackers.
And everyone asks, like, what does this actually mean? What does zero funding mean? What are the real world implications to British basketball as an organisation?
Well, they're pretty devastated. They'd be devastated for any organisation where 80% plus of its revenue comes from that one source. It wasn't at all what we anticipated, because we were originally funded in the lead up to London as a sport with medal potential, and there was never any suggestion it was just about London. Nobody ever thought, anybody that would have thought that would have been off their out of their minds, quite honestly. It's longer term medal potential, and that's what we're looking at Rio for, being able to demonstrate that we have the opportunity to qualify in our own right.
And had UK Sports said to you at any point in the last 4 years that it was going to be for longer than 4 years, or was there just a natural assumption from you that it was going to be?
No, initially when we got the award in 2009, we weren't awarded world-class performance funding. We were awarded funding from what then was called, I think, the development programme, and it was because of the development potential of the sport and its profile in terms of the latent talent that's in it, where it's played, its participation numbers, and the demonstrable ability to be able to compete at the top level. So there's never any suggestion that, and I don't think that it was the case for any of the sports. I know it wasn't in talking to colleagues in other sports. No suggestion that you just getting funding for 4 years and that's it.
And playing devil's advocate a little bit, the criteria for UK sport funding is very clear. They're all about medals. That's all that matters to them, is winning. On that basis, why didn't we see it coming that the funding was going to be cut?
Well, we always knew we were on the cusp. We always knew we were on the cusp of that, but they had an 8-tier categorisation of what they would fund. And we always thought that if we had a quarter-final place, obviously that would have helped our case. But there's small margins, isn't there, in sport? I mean, 1 point lost to the Spanish on the men's side, silver medalists, 1 point lost to the French on the other side. Those small margins make a huge difference. Couple of things either way. The only really bad half of basketball was the one against Australia on the men's side, and everybody accepts that. But hey, this is the same as somebody falling off their bike on the way around the velodrome. Chris Hoy falls off his bike, he doesn't get a medal. So yeah, of course we knew that, but we were a development sport with medal potential. That's what we thought.
Do you think at all that other factors might play a role? Maybe politics. You want to look at the backgrounds of different people in certain high positions. We don't benefit from a basketball culture and an old boys network, if you want to call it that, of people in high places that have got a basketball background that are rooting for us. Do you think that plays a role in this decision?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think it's probably somewhat more complex in the sense that you've just talked about, Sam, the winning mentality, the medal winning criteria. So you go, what it appears is you go from that to the grassroots and talent development at home country level. Sport England on Monday announced that England basketball would have 1.5 million over 4 years. The gap between that type of development, which is largely for young players, and what's required to win medals is therefore huge. So what is there behind there that supports a sport like basketball, which in fairness is probably one of a few that can say this. We've achieved, we're at a certain level in our sport. Going backwards is a real difficult option. But what is there in that gap there when you've made such big strides and you're not quite on the verge of winning medals, but you can realistically qualify for the next Olympics, and depending on the draw, who knows?
And talking in the future, there's obviously this merger happening. What does it mean for the merger? How does it affect England basketball Scotland coming together and unifying underneath the Great Britain?
Well, it's important to acknowledge that it's not a merger. We've got to think about it as a confederated approach.
Okay.
And what that means is it's really about who is the member of FIBA. So as far as that's concerned, the agreement is in place with FIBA, and the home countries are talking about how that works over the next 3 years before the papers have to be put into FIBA to create Britain as the member body. There's an agreement in place there, and we're working through that with FIBA and the other home countries at the minute. But the home countries will remain. They'll be responsible for the grassroots of the sport and talent development at the young levels, with Britain being the member, and they'll be members of FIBA through Great Britain. So it's just important to be clear about the fact that it's not a merger. Those bodies still, but they confederate, and the membership changes from home countries to Britain.
Yeah. And so, worst case scenario, you've said that 80% of your funding comes from UK sport. If an appeal doesn't happen, it's not successful. Where does that leave us? Where are we going to get the money from? How are we going to survive? What's going to happen?
Well, that's the second part of the approach. We've got to, and it's quite interesting. The responses we've had from partners, sponsors, etc., is that we have their support. Now, what we've got to do is mobilise that and see how we can generate as much revenue as possible for the future. We'll be looking at because like all organisations, you operate a reserves policy. So we have reserves which would enable us to achieve our immediate objective, which is to compete in both the men's and women's Eurobaskets this year.
So you've got enough funding to last at least 2013 through with those European Championship commitments?
Yeah, the question is, what can we deliver for the funding? Because it isn't going to be, it's by no means the level of funding that we would normally anticipate to operate in the way that we have been up to now. But it is an operating reserve, and in the time we've had so far, we've made a commitment as a board to say we want to continue for the men to play in Slovenia, for the women to play in France, and we've just got to look at what that means as far as revenue is concerned. How can we generate more revenue? Difficult challenge, but we've got to do that. The sport in this country needs that in some way or other, and maybe it just provides that reason to get behind something. The teams have got to a place that hopefully everybody's been proud of, and hopefully that'll provide a unifying cause.
Do you think that it could be argued that when you first got the funding, you knew it was for 4 years, you weren't told that it was definitely going to be for longer than that? Do you think it could be argued that in those 4 years you could have done a much better job of making British basketball a commercially viable enterprise through privately sourced income and sponsorship and all that kind of stuff, more to the point so that now you wouldn't be reliant on 80% of your funding from UK sport?
Well, there's no sport, even the what you might call the more commercial ones, that doesn't rely heavily on the public purse. Of course we want to be commercially independent, but frankly there are a very, very small number of sports that are commercially independent, and we're probably not mature enough. Even then we wouldn't have been mature enough to have been commercially independent at this point in time. I mean, I think the other thing to remember is that the British basketball operation is extremely lean and very focused on the support and operation of the teams. It does not have a big operation in the background. We've done very well, and in comparison to other sports, with the commercial funding that we've generated through this Olympiad.
There's been a lot of complaints from fans of wastage and overspending over the last 4 years. They feel like money might not be spent in the right place, overspending and wastage. Do you feel that's like a fair assumption or not?
No, absolutely not. We're given funding for UK sport for a particular purpose, and we have to use it for that particular purpose. And they don't give money. They don't say, here's a load of money. We have to put in very detailed business proposals to justify the level of funding that we get. So I'm not sure what people are referring to when they talk about overspend or not managed properly, etc. Because if it gives people assurance, it's a very bureaucratic thing to refer to, but we get the top rating that we can possibly get from external auditors and internal auditors. So there's never been any suggestion from UK Sport that we're spending money in the wrong way. It's actually directed in the right way from their point of view.
UK Sport has kind of said that 2012 in a way was a bit of an anomaly because of the fact that it was a home Olympics, and as a result of that, sports such as basketball actually got funded, where if the London 2012 Olympics wasn't happening, they would never have received funding in the first place. Should we just be grateful for that we got the last 4 years anyway, and then move on?
Well, I suppose that you might legitimately say yes to that if the teams had not achieved the competitive status that they did. What we've got to remember is, I think, unlike any other sport, our host country place wasn't given to us. There was just for any old reason. And as we know, there was the Back British basketball campaign, which you were involved in, for example.
Yeah.
That was a big mobilisation to persuade people, both off the court and on the court, that we were worthy of the place. So it wasn't given to us for nothing. And we certainly never received the message that it would have been probably more helpful if it was said to us at the time, actually, this is only for London. But we've never heard that message.
Yeah. And if you received that message, looking back now, what would you have done differently, if anything?
I don't know whether we'd have done anything different, but I think what we would have done if we'd heard that message is to say, well, okay, that is your view, but what would it take? What achievements would we have to achieve if that was the case? Because I don't think that's a reasonable message for anybody. That's just no motivation or inspiration behind that. And I think one of the things we've tried to do over the last 5 years is to provide an inspiration to the next generation of players. And that, for me, is the big thing about this funding decision. You know, basketball is largely founded in the inner cities. It's not like other sports in that respect. Boxing is probably the only comparator, I would think, in the Olympic sports, to be quite frank. What about the inspiration and aspiration for the next generation coming from the other cities who love basketball?
Yeah, so what do you think the messages, what do you think this funding cut, the messages for all the club coaches, volunteers, the people that have, grafted hard at the grassroots level for the last 10, 15, 20 years, only to see the opposite end of the spectrum, your funding completely cut? What do you think that message is from UK Sport?
Well, I think every sport needs to have something that people are aiming at. If you're a kid in the street, when I was a kid, I wanted to be Joe Royle or something like that, a big Everton fan. You need something to aim at. And I think there's loads of kids out there from the non-traditional UK Sport funded type communities and sports that, frankly, have probably, if this is retained, then there's a piece of inspiration and a piece of aspiration for them and a dream possibility that's been taken away from them.
All that legacy stuff seems like a bit of a...
At the moment, it seems a bit hollow. Yeah.
Talking about the appeal, what is the basis of your appeal going to be, and what is the process? I mean, do you know what the process is? How long does it take when we'll hear whether or not a decision has been made on that appeal?
We're looking into that at the moment. I think from a UK Sport perspective, I think one of the things that we're discussing with them is something that may be additional to that appeal process, which is more formal and on their website, which what we'd like to do is have an opportunity to go in front of the UK Sport Board, because the UK Sport Board works at the strategic level. It is provided with information and it makes decisions not on what the sport has achieved or what it has done. They don't get that level of detail, I don't think, and we want them to understand the passion behind the sport, the aspiration behind the sport, where it's come from and where it wants to go to. We want them to understand that basketball wants to win medals in the future at major championships, including the Olympic Games. 6 or 7 years ago, people said, not good enough to be at the Olympic Games. 6 or 7 years ago, people were thinking we'd never make a European Championships. That's what dreams are made of.
As devastating as this news is this potentially an opportunity for a huge overhaul and almost like a turning point for us to say, what do we need to do to make this work? What do we need to do to make the government and UK Sport and whoever else take this sport seriously that's loved by so many young kids? and be that turning point that in 10, 15, 20 years we look back and say, actually, this was maybe the kick in the arse that we needed to make it work?
Well, I think after my getting on for 40 years in the game, I've heard this on so many occasions that basketball doesn't do itself any favours because there are lots of factions within basketball fighting with one another. And I think if anything comes out of this, for there to be one clear, unified campaign that supports what basketball wants, and that's GB teams with the opportunity to compete at the highest level of the games in this particular case, that could be a unifying effect that goes through the sport. So I'd make an appeal to everybody involved. I mean, hopefully we'll find methods and opportunities for people to be able to express that view, and I'd encourage everybody to join in with that. You know, that I've even had emails this morning from secondary schools where the PE departments have said our basketball players are so upset about this, they want to start a petition. Could we get other schools to join in with this? You know, that's the type of thing where if we can provide that sort of opportunity in some way or other and keep the momentum of, because we probably have more media coverage in TV and the mainstream sports pages over the last 24 hours, which is really ironic. You know, basketball is in the picture, and yet it's for this reason.
So right now, as it stands, you've got about a year, right, with the funding that you have.
Yeah.
Right now the current funding cycle ends in April, right? Is that
correct? Yeah.
Is there a possibility that you're going to have to look at everything now and say we're going to have to maybe lay off staff, cut back a lot?
Oh, we're going to have to look at. We're going to have to look at the worst case scenario is what have we got to operate from reserve, and what does that mean if we want to realise our ambition of fulfilling the places of the both Eurobaskets in the coming year?
Because obviously the funding's been cut so much, because there is so little money right now, should we say goodbye to our NBA players, Lawal, Joel Freeland now, and all of our top players playing for the Great Britain team?
Well, all I can say to that is I hope not. It's impossible for me to say, but Lou was playing last night. We're in dialogue with Lou, etc. But I hope. I mean, I know how committed those guys are, and I really hope it's not about that. But we'll just have to see how resource and other logistics and everything else fits in. As the picture becomes a little bit clearer in the early part of next year, I guess.
Do you think there could be a more commitment? I know that your job as a federation, or it has been for the last 4 years, is for the high performance end of the scale. But do you think there could have been a greater commitment to youth, so that in the next 2 cycles by 2020 or whenever it is, we've got more of the top young British talent coming through?
Well, I think there are tremendous talent programmes in England and Scotland using the funding that's provided by their respective sports councils. Basketball Wales doesn't have that same funding. They don't get supported by Sport Wales. The talent programme has been recognised with £1.5 million award on Monday this week to England basketball by Sport England. But you can see £1.5 million over 4 years. It's not a great deal of money.
Yeah.
Again, you come back to the point that the pathway is a unified thing. And the issue now is if a pathway is going to provide motivation beyond the amount of funding available, it needs to be complete. The question is now, it doesn't feel as complete as it did do on Monday.
Yeah. And on that same basis, talking about junior players and the commitment to youth, one of the key things that you've been doing is the regional institutes of basketball. Where you've obviously got the one at the Barking Abbey at the moment. What does it mean for that? I mean, I know you have plans for more in the future, and kind of dotted around the country. Are they going to be able to reevaluate it now and kind of see what the situation is going forward?
I mean, I think it's more the system than anything else. I mean, Barking Abbey has not relied on British basketball or England basketball funding to do what it's achieved. Same with other places around the country. The question of regional institutes is, can it build on what's already there, really, in the right places? So I suppose it's taking that added value, and what does it do to that added value? And again, it's probably too early to say what the impact will be. Clearly, a loss of that amount of funding means that it's going to be really difficult to manage, particularly when you get to the the under 20 level and beyond, and the development programs. We've got to really take stock of what can be done with the resources available, and not pretend that the loss of the resource means that you can provide the same amount of opportunity.
So, to kind of finish, I guess, what is the future for British basketball?
Unclear at the moment, but we're not going away. I think for the future of the game, the things that we're looking to do, whatever happens, we need to build through the age group programs. That's really essential, and that means that we may have to redesign the way that we approach it. We may have to look at how what other opportunities are available to us through other partnerships and networks. Very often, if you lose money or you have less money, there's a lot of innovation comes out in those times. So it'll be fascinating to see how that reveals itself for basketball going forward.